through committee meetings a little bit differently. We are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city website and also linked on the committee page. We also have an option for the public to listen and comment live by phone. Please dial 855-925-2801 and use meeting code 7663 to listen in. For those of you who are out there with us today, thank you for being there and we welcome you. I will now go through and introduce all the committee members who are participating virtually. Please make sure to mute your microphone if you're not speaking. When you have a question or would like to speak, unmute your microphone. Please remember to mute your phone, option 6, after done speaking. Committee members, when I call your name, please say a quick hello and who you are with and what sector you're in. We have some new folks here today and we'd like for them to know a little bit more about you. Babs Phillip. Is Babs here today? No. Okay. Brandy Woodard. Okay. Paul Heathman.
Hi, my name is Paul Heathman. I'm been in and around the real estate business for several years. I'm an AVP and a mortgage lender at Home Trust Bank. I've been on this committee for, a couple of years now, I guess. Thank you.
Andy Barnett.
Good morning. I'm Andy Barnett. I'm the Executive Director with Asheville Area Habitat for Humanity. I've been a part of AHAC for a long time. 4 or 5 years.
Joe Eichelheimer. Brian Methvin.
Good morning, I'm Brian Methvin. I'm an independent consultant. I've been active with homeless causes here in Asheville for a long time and very concerned about affordable housing issues, and have been on AHAC for 2 years.
Okay. Joe just joined, so I see her now. Joe? I saw that she joined, so we know she's here. She may be muted. Scott Adams?
Good morning, I'm Scott Adams. I'm a regional planner with the Land of Sky Regional Council, and I've been on the committee for right on about 2 years and interested in all things housing, land use, and zoning.
Dwana Little? Chris Day?
Hello, good morning. My name is Chris Day. I am a civil engineer with Civil Design Concepts been on this committee for a year and have 20 years of experience in development of all types of housing.
And I'm going to go back to Joe. Are you here? Are you back on? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I am, Margie. Sorry about that. I was just logging in. So I take it we're
I'm doing roll call.
Introductions. Yeah, Joe Eichelheimer. I've been on the committee for about 6 years. I think I'm getting ready to roll off, but I work in affordable housing on the national level in the country and live here in Asheville for the last 16 years.
Great. And I want to welcome our newest member, Emily Axeman. Welcome, Emily. We are so glad you're on the committee.
Yeah, so my name's Emily Axeman. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you in COVID style. I'm an architect in Asheville. I work for Row House. We're a 4-person firm, do multiple projects around the city, anything from townhomes to multifamily projects, a lot of historic preservation as well. My background is pretty much solely in affordable housing up until now. I worked in Denver or in the Colorado area for about 9 years before this, specifically on affordable multifamily housing projects. Also quite a few supportive permanent housing projects. What else? I worked on a tiny house project in Denver, which was pretty interesting. So yeah, I'll stop there. I'm happy to be here and looking forward to working with everybody.
Well, we look forward to your very valuable input on our committee. So, and I also want to say welcome to Sasha Vertunsky, who is our new permanent affordable housing officer. So we appreciate the fact that you're now with us full time.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here and really excited about doing great things with you all.
Great. So now we're going to talk about the approval of the minutes. Has everybody had an opportunity to look at the minutes from, this would be our May 5th meeting, where we had several action items, because we did not have a meeting in June. So if there are any additions, comments, or anything to the minutes meetings, if there isn't anything, then I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the minutes from May 5th.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Second.
Great. Thank you so very much. We have a link on the website or the city page to the monthly housing data. I did notice that we have about 19 houses under 375 listed, and I think 7 or 8 of those are under contract, but we also have about 14 condos that are listed. Anybody in the real estate world want to make a comment about our current houses that are listed? No, well, there's beautiful pictures on there if you want to look at that link. And so now we're going to go to our Housing Community Development Committee monthly information sharing. Oh, you know what? I just realized that I forgot Antoinette Mosley, who is our city liaison to City Council. Antoinette, I didn't see her picture. I know she's here, but she's a little under the weather.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you.
And Margie, did David Bartholomew get to introduce himself? Or did I miss that?
No.
David, are you there? I'm so sorry. I apologize. I didn't see.
No worries. No worries at all. Good morning, everyone. David Bartholomew. I'm the Homelessness Prevention Director at Pisco Legal Services, focused on eviction diversion, and I've only been on this committee for, I think, 4 or 5 months. So glad to be here.
Great. Thank you. I apologize for leaving you off there, David.
No worries.
So we're going to talk about HCD, and we have a presentation this morning by Rachel Wood, who is our new Assistant City Manager. Rachel, can you want to give us a little bit, tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the introductions. This is definitely an impressive group, and appreciate your willingness to serve on this board. I've been with the organization since January. Prior to coming to Asheville, I worked for about 4 years for the city of Denton, Texas, which is just north of Dallas and Fort Worth. Very high growth community with a population of about 140,000. While I was there, I worked in capital project development, also served as the chief of staff in the city manager's office. And prior to working in Denton, I worked for about 8 years for the city of Charlotte in several different roles, primarily in the budget office, working on strategic planning and capital budgeting there. I also have experience in Savannah, Georgia, and then a small community called Lake Worth Beach in Palm Beach County, Florida. So love local government, excited to be in Asheville. Asheville's been where my husband and I have always wanted to live and work. And so we're excited to have this opportunity, and still have a lot to learn. I'm going to keep calling myself new for at least the first year, just because I'm meeting players and learning the landscape, and definitely know for the first year, I'm going to kind of be in sponge mode, trying to absorb the community landscape, and then try to work on some of the major topics that we're trying to tackle as a community. On June 21st, I gave a presentation to the Housing and Community Development Committee related to the work plan concept. And this is something that's an offshoot of conversations that myself, Deborah, the rest of the city manager's office have been having with the city council since their March retreat. So I'm going to pull up a presentation in just a second, but just to kind of give a high level overview, at the March retreat, the city council established 6 strategic priority areas for the current fiscal year that just started in July. And we've been talking about how do we as staff and how do we work with the advisory boards and other community groups to make sure that we're operationalizing the city council strategic priorities and ultimately having a communication loop back to the city council via their committees or through the city council meetings themselves to make sure that city council is aware of the progress that we're making in each of their priority areas throughout the year. So that's how, as we brainstorm what are some of the best vehicles to do that, the committee work plan concept came to be. And so as we're talking through this, I want to make sure you all are aware this is very much still a pilot. So Housing and Community Development Committee is what we're piloting this work plan concept with. And then the concept is Housing and Community Development Committee would identify what are the key policy areas that committee, council committee wants to focus on throughout the year. And then they'll be designating key assignments that different advisory boards, including AHAC, will be working on, and then provide an outlet for AHAC to report back to the city council committee throughout the year, the progress that you're making, recommendations that you may have to then ultimately inform the committee's policy recommendations that full city council would then approve. So I'm going to reiterate some of that in this presentation, but just wanted to give you all that high level overview and make sure you all knew this is very much a pilot. So today I definitely want feedback from you all on how you see this concept potentially working at the advisory board level, and then ultimately what you would like to see in terms of that feedback loop between the advisory board and the city council committees. So with that, I'm going to pull up the presentation. And this is pretty much the same presentation that was delivered to the Housing and Community Development Committee just over a week ago. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so just a few key takeaways. City council committees were established to review policy matters and make policy recommendations that are ultimately then considered by the full city council. The city council strategic priorities inform what each city council committee should focus on throughout the fiscal year. Annual work plans, once established, would serve as a useful tool to plan for and better organize the work of city council committees. Committee work plans include specific assignments for advisory boards, which then inform future policy recommendations. And then we're recommending that individual advisory boards have their own respective work plans to help ensure alignment with council committees and facilitate advanced planning for future meeting agendas, so that there's not a question from a staff perspective or for the chair and committee, what is it that we're going to be talking about at our next meeting? I know that's likely not the case with this advisory board, but I know there are advisory boards across Asheville that sometimes don't have content to cover at their monthly meeting. And so the thought process is the work plan would provide that advanced planning so that we're not having to scramble to pull together materials for the advisory board meetings each month. So I'm not going to read through this, but the city council established the community's vision back in 2018. And the intent of a vision, just like any of you with your corporations, is to be broad, multi-year, and very aspirational in nature. Back in 2018, there were also focus areas that were established to really look at, when we look at our vision, what are those key areas that we look at? How would we potentially operationalize that long-term vision in the community? And then to get a little more specific on that one-year horizon, as I mentioned before bringing up the presentation, at each city council retreat that typically happen in the spring as a part of the budget process, strategic priorities are adopted. So back in March, 6 strategic priorities for the current fiscal year that just started in July were adopted. Those include improve and expand core services, houselessness strategies, equitable and affordable housing instability, neighborhood resilience, reimagining public safety, and reparations. So obviously, given the charge of AHAC as well as Housing and Community Development Committee, there are several strategic priorities that touch on the work of this committee, as well as that touch on the work of the City Council Committee that you all ultimately report up to. So just to kind of another visual to show you what I just described, we have that broad city council vision. We get a little more specificity with the city council's focus areas, and then those strategic priorities that have more of an annualized view. We're going to be developing over the next month that pilot work plan for the Housing and Community Development Committee. And then we'll be working with this group over the next couple of months on the development of your work plan to really look at how do we operationalize that priority direction received from City Council. And then as a sister effort, internally, the department directors and city manager's office are developing an organizational work plan that also aligns to the City Council strategic priorities. There's a lot of overlap between the organizational work plan as well as the council committee work plans and advisory boards. So just to use a simple example, very complex project, but a relatively simple example would be revisions to the land use incentive grant program. Of course, Sasha's going to be working on that. She's going to be likely working with this advisory board on that. And it will also most likely be an item that would be on the council committee work plan as well. So just to go through the concept in a little bit greater detail, I've already mentioned that the strategic priorities are typically reviewed and approved each year at the City Council retreat. Those priorities inform City Council committee work plans that then outline key areas of focus for that committee throughout the fiscal year. Those work plans will then assign specific projects, programs, and policy areas for advisory boards, as well as staff, to research and work through during the fiscal year. And then advisory board work plans would be developed and associated agendas for the advisory board meetings centered on work assigned from those City Council committees. And I will note that it doesn't mean that the only work of the advisory boards has to come directly from the City Council committee work plans. And that's one of the things that we want to talk to this group about, as you all are essentially going to be our guinea pig for this process. Key policy areas we're envisioning those would be focused on based on direction received from the City Council committees. But we do know that there are going to be other areas. There may be presentations that you want to hear or specific topics related to one of those policy recommendations that you may want to drill down into and be provided more detail on. And so we just want to think about, how do we give the necessary autonomy to the advisory boards while still making sure that the work that you're doing is directly aligned with that policy direction from the City Council committees. Advisory boards, as I've mentioned, our thought process in this would be having an outlet to have more regular feedback loops between the advisory board and the council committee. So we're envisioning potentially at a minimum having quarterly report backs from advisory boards to the City Council committees, just so that you can have that dialogue directly and you're not having to always rely on city staff as that intermediary. And then based on the recommendations made from the advisory boards, the council committees would use that feedback to develop policy recommendations, which would ultimately be approved and considered by the City Council. So just to use an example of how we're seeing this flow potentially working, strategic priority of equitable and affordable housing and stability. So that's one of the 6 strategic priorities for the current fiscal year. The associated City Council committee is the Housing and Community Development Committee. And then a committee work plan topic would be update affordable housing strategies. And so this is actually one of the committee work plan topics that we are considering bringing forward to the full Housing and Community Development Committee whenever they meet in August. So from there, a potential assignment from the Housing and Community Development Committee could be review land use incentive grant policy and develop recommended revisions. And so you would develop your recommended revisions, report back on a quarterly or semi-regular basis to the Housing and Community Development Committee. There would be some back and forth. You may be assigned additional research from the committee, and ultimately the recommendations that you make would be considered by the City Council committee, and then those recommendations would be brought forward to a future City Council meeting for potential adoption of those policy revisions. So next steps, as I've mentioned, we're working right now on drafting the work plan for the Housing and Community Development Committee, and we're planning on bringing that forward July 19th for the Housing and Community Development Committee to review, potentially approve, or they may get staff feedback and we would need to bring it back again in August. On August 4th, at your next meeting, we do plan on coming back with more specific assignments based on the either approved or draft work plan from the Housing and Community Development Committee. And then once we get those work plans established, then we'll look at, is it quarterly or how frequently should representatives from this group report back to the City Council Committee, in this case, the Housing and Community Development Committee, on the progress you're making for the different policy areas that this group is focused on. In fall of 2022, likely in September, we're going to take some of the lessons learned we have as we're developing the work plan for Housing and Community Development Committee and look at rolling out this similar process for all of the City Council committees, and then making specific assignments to advisory boards across the city in several different topic areas. So I won't go through the key takeaways again, just because I would be repeating myself multiple times. But really, the intent of today's presentation is one to have a high-level overview of the concept of work plans. Again, we'll be coming back with more specificity to this group at your August meeting, but really want to kind of open the floor to, one, answer any questions that you might have, and then two, get feedback from you all on your experience on areas that maybe we need to be considering as topics for the work plan, or ideas that you have on how to better improve communication between advisory boards, city council committees, and ultimately to full city council.
Thank you, Rachel. That was wonderful. We really appreciate all your efforts to get this across to us. Committee members, do you have questions for Rachel? Andy?
Rachel, thanks so much. This is really, it's helpful, and you guys have put a ton of work into fleshing out these details. I have kind of one big concern that jumps out to me, or I won't say concern, question. It feels like a lot of this rolls down from, from council priorities to council committee to the advisory boards. And that certainly creates a lot of clarity and direction for us. It's a little bit different than what this committee has tried to be at some points, which is sort of a citizen input platform that would flow, agenda setting, recommendations up. So how do we get, you mentioned, part of this realignment was to improve community input in decision making. So, how do community members impact or affect the agenda setting that's happening at HCD, if that's going to then roll down and determine this committee's work plan? It really makes the place where I see this making a big difference is in the committee makeup. And because we've got some new members, we've got some open seats coming up. The example that you've described, this committee really would be serving kind of as a force multiplier, technical assistance to staff, right? Which means we need a committee makeup that looks like a lot of the folks that are on the call today, people with background in engineering and background in land use and those sorts of things. What it doesn't look like is some of the members of the committee who aren't on the call today and who we've struggled to engage, who have more lived experience, who are maybe more affected by some of the decisions that we make about affordable housing. So if we're trying to be more representative and get, the people who are most affected by the policy decisions of the city, making this more of a kind of technical, you're going to look at changes to the land use incentive grants, something that's kind of almost more of a, none of us are experts in that to the same degree that Nikki and Sasha and the staff team is. How do we create the platform for citizens who are affected by the affordable housing challenges that we face and by our policy decisions? How do they have influence on what things make it onto the onto the work plan agenda for HCD around this topic if they're not coming up through AHAC?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that actually Sasha and I were talking about a little bit yesterday. And again, we're kind of figuring this out as we go. But I think that's where we're going to have the benefit of having your work plan, which will be aligned with the committee's work plan, but doesn't necessarily have to have a 1-to-1 ratio. So it's not that you're only working on topics assigned from the council committee. And so if you have specific areas that you're wanting to cover that maybe you're not seeing on the city council committee's work plan, I think we can use those quarterly updates from the AHAC committee to have dialogue with the city council on these are areas that we are focusing on, and these are policy considerations you may want to make. One important point that I did not mention as a part of my presentation is obviously the topic areas for our advisory boards as well as the council committees are big. Obviously, affordable housing is not something that we're going to be able to solve in 1 year. Unfortunately, we wish we all could. But the focus of the work plan is what can we foreseeably do as a committee, as an advisory board over the next year to move the needle towards making additional affordable housing units available or having additional tools and resources available for affordable housing in the community. So that's an important point, is really what we're looking at is that 1 year snapshot of what do we have the resources and bandwidth to do over the next year. And so that's where I think you can use your advisory board's work plan and those regular updates with city council to have that communication on, are we focusing on the right things, but then also making sure we've got some guardrails around what is doable over the course of the next year, just because these topics are very broad and we want to make sure that we've got projects and programs identified that are manageable and that we have identified milestones and tasks so that we can ultimately show the progress that we're making, rather than it just seeming like we're maybe in a cyclical loop and not identifying what are those key initiatives that we can focus on and really make some significant impact on over the course of the fiscal year.
Could I make a couple comments to that? I think, Andy, you do bring a very good point. And I think there's a couple of things. I do think that AHAC's advice on policy matters should definitely include, what's going on in the community. If there are things like, it doesn't all have to be technical, right? So if there are community members on this committee who say, hey, sounds great on paper, but here's some real issues, that's part of your, consideration and advice to council, I think. And it's the same with staff. And if we're working on the same thing together, it's a nice alignment where I was talking with Rachel yesterday about, one tool we often use in city staff is if we're trying to evaluate, is this a good policy decision or recommendation? Let's do a focus group with this group. We don't know how this affects this group of people. And so staff might be doing some of that work and bringing that information to you all to consider. It might be the kind of thing if we had a focus group of a particular group that's going to be impacted, that some of you are there and attending and listening. I think it's not going to be doable on every single thing, but I think for the really big nuggets, important work plan items, we need your help to make sure we're considering all the different points of view. That's partly our job as staff. It's not just purely a technical consideration, but we definitely want to be considering all the impacts to the community. And if they're not on your committee, then let's make sure we're getting those opinions and going out to the community and finding that information out.
Good points. Anybody else? No? Well, Rachel, I think we need to think about it a little bit, and maybe we'll get back to you via email or something. I think that you've given us a tremendous amount of information, and I think that it's going to be very important for us to kind of go through that and figure out how we can align all of what we're planning on doing. We are definitely thinking, we've been working a little bit on our work plan. Right now, the committee has been working under a 2008 work plan. So we've already met a couple of times and are working with folks to try to update that. But we definitely need to maybe sit down with you prior to the next meeting and try to hash through some of those things. And so I don't know if you have the 2008 work plan for AHEC or not, but we certainly would be glad to, I can send it to you if you don't have it somewhere.
Sure. And actually, I think Nikki and I have a series of meetings coming up where we're going to be going through that. So definitely welcome meeting with members of this advisory board. And just wanted to note, I will be presenting that draft work plan and having some additional dialogue with the Housing and Community Development Committee at their July 19th meeting. And then I believe the plan is for your August meeting for me to come back and us to have maybe more of a working session to really dial into what should the work plan include for fiscal year 2022-2023, which just started.
Right. Okay. Thank you so very, very much. We appreciate it. So let's, Jonathan, do you have, we talked last time about the CDBG repair funds for manufactured homes, and there's an update included in our packet. Anything that you can add to that for right now?
Certainly, I think I can give you a bit of an update, just a little bit of background for anybody that may not be familiar with the conversation that we've been having over the last few months. But at the March meeting, this committee made a recommendation to update or amend the current CDBG policy for Asheville to include mobile home repairs on mobile and manufactured homes that are not on a permanent foundation. Because that was one of the restrictions listed in our current policy. Staff have gone back to the CDB regulations, to HUD guidance to sort of investigate that option. Right now, the state of North Carolina considers a mobile home that is not on a permanent foundation to be titled as a motor vehicle. And so in order to convert that to real property, the hitch, tongue, and axles would need to be removed, and the mobile unit would need to be permanently fixed to property. And at that point, then it would be considered real property and could then be repaired or provided with some rehab using CDBG funds. A little bit of dialogue at one of our, I guess it was the April meeting, about clarifying that, and some questions about, HUD's definition of permanent housing stock and whether or not that applies to mobile and manufactured homes. And I believe David shared a policy brief from one of the law clerks at Pisco that outlines some questions, concerns, and some discussion about the applicability of CDBG regulations and definitions. At the same time, our team reached out to the HUD field office for further clarification. Those materials were supposed to be linked in the agenda, and I realized that we had a link that was directed to the previous agenda folder. So I'm hoping everybody's got access to that, but I can share a copy of that memo if that's not immediately available. Give me just a moment. I will at least put that in the comments so that folks can have access to that. Bear with me just a second. So there should be a copy there, and I can share my screen. Kind of walk through this. I see a question from Chris as my computer is trying to update and share my screen.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. So do we have an idea on what the cost is to remove the hitch and axles and to convert these to the permanent foundation to kind of so that the funds could be released? Is there another source of funding that could help folks transition to that point?
That is an interesting question, and I it's something that I realized in the response that I'm sharing now that we might want to consider, but for the moment we can't, according to the response from HUD, we can't use the CDBG funds on a unit that's not on a permanent foundation. So the question that I've got on the screen here, I reached out to the HUD field office, very specifically referenced this committee's recommendation, provided the research that my team did, provided those links. Those are in the same document. And then the response from the field office was essentially that for a unit to be to be part of the community's permanent housing stock, according to the CDB regulations, it would have to be on a permanent foundation. To the point that there was further recommendation that if we do provide rehab on a mobile or manufactured home, and it's converted to real property on a permanent foundation, that we include a clause requiring that it stay on that permanent foundation to protect the CDBG investment, so that somebody would not be incentivized to, for whatever reason, put a foundation in place, qualify for CDBG repairs, funded repairs, and then remove said foundation and relocate the unit. That is certainly a very complicated and expensive process, but to give you an idea of where HUD is coming from, the permanent foundation is really a key element of their permanent housing stock definition. I think the points made in the policy recommendation from Pisco, sharing that as well on the screen, those are in the document. Interesting points that I'm concerned that there's not much that we can do to get those regulations changed at the federal level based on the laws and guidelines referenced here. So basically, following HUD's guidance from our field office, we really would be in bad shape to try to change our local policy and be out of compliance with HUD's guidance.
Andy, you had a question?
Paul was ahead of me.
Oh, Paul, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so this seems like maybe an obvious question, but it seems to be about when the determination is being made, right? Like if the tongue are not removed, the work that needs to be done to qualify hasn't been done yet, but we don't make the determination as to what's been done until the repairs are complete, then we can say that upon completion of the repairs, then it now qualifies, right?
So I think that's, and to sort of Chris's point as well, I think the question about the removal of the tongue hitch and axles and the installation of a permanent foundation may very well be CDBG eligible activities as part of the rehab process.
Yeah.
But those would have to be in place that would have to be part of the scope of work proposed during the rehabilitation process. That said, that could be a simple clarification from HUD that we would be allowed to use CDBG funds for the installation of permanent foundations, and that would not require us to change our current policy.
Cool. So we may jump this hurdle.
As long as we have clarification from HUD that the installation of those permanent foundations would be an eligible cost and activity with the CDBG funds.
Thank you.
Jonathan, it sounds like I'm hearing you say that it's a HUD requirement. It sounds like it's a HUD requirement based on a North Carolina property law. Because I know this is being used in other states, and maybe it's a function of the fact that they don't have the property law in those states that has such a limited definition of what constitutes real property. This connection between what is real property and what is part of the permanent housing stock seems to be the crux to the issue here. Like we are, HUD's rule is you can only use CDBG on units that are part of the public housing stock. We're saying that the North Carolina property statute that you've referenced defines things as being part of the permanent housing stock if they're real property, right?
Correct.
So I'm going to ask the same question that I did when we discussed this back in April or May, which is, are we prepared as a community to take the, thousands of units that are of manufactured housing that exist in our community and treat them as though they are not part of our housing supply? Like, what is that going to mean for us in other policy decisions? Do we need to start treating those households and those housing units as part of our unhoused population if their housing is not a permanent part of our housing stock?
So I think first of all, Asheville's decisions to consider something as part of our community's housing stock does not necessarily have to be linked one-to-one with HUD's definition of what that means. It just means that we would be limited in using CDBG for that purpose. I will point out that our housing trust fund also uses the exact same definition. It refers to the permanent housing. It refers to manufactured homes on permanent foundations as being a requirement to invest those funds, as well as by reference, the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency has a single family rehab program. They use the same definition. They use the same thresholds. So I think there's some community precedent, but at the same time, and a statewide precedent for using that as a threshold and an eligibility threshold. As far as the question of whether or not somebody who is living in a mobile home that is not on a permanent foundation is unhoused, I think we have a tendency to veer into other definitions of that HUD and the community may use for what is permanent housing versus shelter versus temporary or transitional housing, and sort of use those terms interchangeably when that's not actually the case. So if we talk about permanent housing when it relates to our homelessness housing intervention resources, permanent housing is a unit that is being leased to a person long term. It's not really the nature of its manufacturing. If somebody is housed in a unit for, and I think you referenced point in time count in the past, it's not based on what the nature of the construction is for that count. Is that person stably housed? Yes. Is their housing eligible for CDBG rehabilitation? No. In the same, it's kind of, and can get into being a slippery slope if we start defining where people that are living as permanent housing based on tenure. So if somebody was living in their car for 30 years, they would be homeless. But because they've been there for 30 years doesn't make that car part of our permanent housing stock. And so where we split the hair, where it seems like we're splitting hairs, has some real impacts. But specifically, CDBG define that's really where it comes down to is what the HUD interpretation of the permanent housing stock is.
All right.
Andy, I see your hand up, but if I could just say, so what I hear you saying, Jonathan, is that we're very limited in the HUD funding, but
Yes.
we could, and we apparently do have that limitation in our housing trust fund, but our local funding is where we actually have the flexibility.
Yes.
And so it may be that the housing trust fund may be the place that we think about. I'm brand new, and so somebody's gonna like send me an email about this, but it seems like local funding is where we have the flexibility to put our local priorities. And Andy, go.
Right. Well, so, and that was what I was going to say. Like Jonathan, it might sound like I'm splitting hairs. I'm not trying to split hairs. What I'm trying to say is we've got a significant number of people in our community whose housing is naturally occurring affordable housing, primarily with a limited equity type of ownership, but still ownership, who face limitations to being able to maintain that home in a safe and habitable condition that other people in our community have access to, simply because of the type of property ownership designation. Our goal, I understand, as a committee, is elevating the places where people are falling through our policy cracks, right? This is a place where people are falling through our policy cracks. And my interest in raising this as a CDBG eligible activity is we have scarce local dollars, right? We have, when we look at the mix of tools that the city can invest in affordable housing, the federal tools are, are a pool that we don't have to generate out of our own community, that we can use, as long as we're working within the eligible activities, we can use those first and use the local dollars to, as our most flexible resources. So I like to use those first, if we can think about that. It sounds like you've run this rabbit. You're convinced that this isn't going anywhere as a federal tool. So we need to think about, if this is going to be done with limited local dollars, then we have to start deciding priorities between using those limited local dollars to help to fund one kind of housing activity versus funding another kind of housing activity. And when we get back to the conversation we were having earlier with Rachel, I don't know where we make those decisions, right? To say these are the places where my neighbors in this community are not getting their housing needs met, and we're going to put these scarce resources in these places. So this is a need that I see. If it can't be met through federal dollars, let's start thinking about how we could meet this need with local dollars. And then we've got to do the hard work of figuring out how do we invest in this versus something else. But this is, I'm not going to keep beating this dead horse on the CDBG side of things. End of the day, we've got a group of people in our community who can access the resources that they need to be able to maintain their homes in a safe and healthy condition. And they're, some of the folks who are finding ways to make affordable housing happen in a market-based, unsubsidized fashion for the most part.
I hear you loud and clear, Andy. I think everybody on this call is interested in addressing those issues. Based on our feedback from the HUD field office, this is just not the right tool for the job. So we need, as you're saying, to identify other tools that would be more appropriate.
Do we know what the cost is to remove the tongue, the hitch, and the axle? Anybody know what that cost roughly is? No? Okay. Certainly something that I think maybe we can investigate and find out what that cost is versus, and also the cost to put something on a permanent foundation. So I think our committee could certainly reach out to some people that we know and see if we can get those answers and maybe bring this conversation back around next month.
Yeah, Margie, I mean, I don't know the specific dollars, but I would say it's significantly more than the cost of the repairs the kinds of repairs that we're talking about these units needing, right? I mean, it wouldn't be, it would be more cost effective to find a local source that didn't have those restrictions to, replace the, flooring in a bathroom in a trailer so somebody's toilet doesn't fall through. Than it would be to put it on a foundation so that you could finance those repairs through CDBG.
David?
Yeah, it's prohibitively expensive. And, I think one of the reasons, I'm very interested in getting to the bottom of this answer is that the federal money really would make a huge difference. It's not a ton of money required to get a trailer to repair one, but to move one or to put it on a permanent foundation is usually more than the cost of that. And it's obvious that whatever the technical definition, that many people in Western North Carolina are living in mobile homes as their permanent housing stock. And we are counting it for several places or several different grants and several different counts. And the state needs to know, Raleigh needs to know if the state law is what's prohibiting it. Now, I'm not sure. I just saw the response because I didn't see it. I don't think it was sent out in the data. So I'll take a look at that. I do think that is a problem, right? Not all states go through the DMV and title the mobile home stock that way. So I understand what you're saying, and I'll try to take a look at it. I do know that funding is used to repair mobile homes throughout the country in many different places. So if there's something prohibited, we can find out if it's state law or if it's local or county law, and then we can try to address the problem that way. I agree with Andy's point. We've got a limited pool of resources, but we need to figure out how to use what we've got for people who need it. And this would make a huge difference, I think, for a lot of people. So I'll take a look at that memo. I'm just looking at it right now, and I can get the costs and estimates, but I mean, I have lots of clients who are trying to move things, or the legal process to title one, right? I mean, to pay an attorney, it's not something that is going to be accessible for almost anyone who's in this situation.
Should we make this an action item that we want to make sure that we have notes and Sasha, so that we can follow up on this, and somebody to make a motion that somehow we continue this discussion and try to get to more defined actions for further down the road?
I can definitely just add those bullet points as you just stated them into the action agenda. I don't feel like you absolutely have to vote on it, but it'll just be abbreviated bullet points, just what you just said.
Okay, that sounds good.
I'll make sure.
I think we definitely need to continue this conversation and see what we're going to be able to do. And I appreciate David and Andy and Jonathan and Paul, all the help or information you can gather to help us get to where we need to be. So maybe we could do a benchmark. David, do you know, reaching out to one of the cities in one of the states that has this, so we could get some more information from that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a look at it. Like, I'm just now seeing the research, and I didn't even know the memo was being circulated. So, I'll take a look at this. This will be a priority for me. So I'll try to get to something next week and just email the committee.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So next on our agenda is the Affordable Housing Calculator. I know that Sasha has been doing a lot of work on this, trying to figure out mortgage rates, and Paul Heathman has been working with us on this too. Would you like to talk about that, Paul or Sasha? I know you've been trying to get some updates.
And I will say it's Christina, not me. I can't take
sorry.
credit or anything.
Okay, Christina and Paul, sorry, on that.
Hey, yeah, this is Paul. Hey, Christina, I see you just popped up. Good. Well, I'll hand it off to you pretty quickly. We met virtually, or just on the phone, I think, and discussed mortgage rates. Of course, they're just more volatile than they've ever been. They've actually slidden back a little bit just in the last maybe week or so, but still much higher. And was totally necessary to update this calculator because wow, how different are these numbers that they're going to put out with these new rates. So yeah, Christina, please.
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul. I'm sorry about that. I couldn't seem to.
Hey, Christina, you're a little muffled.
Muffled.
One second. Can you all hear me?
A little bit.
What about if I move a little closer? Sorry, this is so.
Oh yeah, it's starting to improve.
Closer and louder. Yeah.
Okay, got you. So yes, thank you, Paul, and thank you for this board for actually helping us out a lot with this affordable housing calculator. So I've been working with the IT department to get this updated. Been working kind of specifically with Paul Heathman just to make sure that we have the correct figures and everything that needs to go into the affordable housing calculator. But we really wanted to bring this back to you all to get your input on it, see if there's anything that has changed since we've updated it. And I believe these figures are from May 2022. But yeah, we're just bringing this to the table to get more discussion about it, see how we can update it so that the community members have the information and, the most recent information at their disposal.
Okay. So do we have a timetable? I mean, are you saying that it's going to be happening? It's actually done, or?
Yeah. So based off of the information that we received in May of 2022, we've just gone ahead and updated it, seeing that the June meeting had been canceled. We just figured it would be best to get that kind of done and then present it to you guys when the time came. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a timeline. It's more so following the market, and when we see things kind of, steady, things sort of getting more steady, then we can go in and kind of update it as needed and accordingly.
Paul?
Yeah, I would say that, just from the rate perspective, like we could probably stand to update this really frequently. So if Christina, if you want to just reconnect with me at whatever frequency is appropriate, I would say at least monthly we could do it. And hopefully it doesn't take us too much time just from like getting it into the website, updating those numbers. Hopefully, whoever's doing that isn't having to put too much time into it. But I think increasing the frequency of updating those numbers makes the most sense. So we're bound to be off by some margin no matter what, but let's try to get it as close as possible. If you're up for that, I certainly am.
Yes, definitely up for that. Thank you, Paul.
Andy?
Do you have a sense of the web traffic to this tool?
I personally do not, but I can find that out for you all and kind of, send that in an email and then put that in the public meeting folder. But I personally don't know the traffic to that calculator.
Yeah, I mean, that might, there are a lot of those calculators around that might help you determine the frequency of updates if it's not, if it's not seeing a lot of traffic.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Christina. We appreciate your work and Paul's work on this.
Yeah,
So next on our new business, we were supposed to have a presentation today by Kate Pett with Thrive. Unfortunately, Kate is under the weather and is not able to do her presentation today, but Sasha is going to do a little bit of filling in for us as we talk about the Thrive Asheville project, which Kate received some ARPA funding and some direction on how to use that ARPA funding. She did a presentation to the committee and she was chosen. And so she's getting a little bit, up to speed on her direction, looking at things through an equity lens, housing through an equity lens. Sasha, can you give us a little more detail on that?
I will try my best. And Nikki also probably knows just as much, if not more than I do about this. Thrive did receive funding, ARPA funding from City Council. And part of their goal is to help evaluate city tools, affordable housing tools, bringing the community. It kind of goes back to your comment earlier, Andy, of bringing in community perspectives and equity. Council has talked several times, and they're about making sure that who's benefiting from affordable housing units, that we're clear on that and trying to measure that and having some equitable outcomes for that. So I will share my screen. I have a slide that now I will say that this is a draft slide. And I think Kate is actually on the meeting, but she's not feeling well. So I'm not going to, unless she wants to chime in. Can you all see this? Okay.
I think Kate was trying to speak. I just saw her audio blinking, but I wasn't sure.
Kenny, did you want to say something? I hear birds in the background of somebody's audio.
Hey guys, I'm sorry. I was just trying to adjust my screen. I'm really not up for presenting, and so I apologize. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
I'm gonna stay off for today.
Okay,
Sorry.
no problem. So, and Nikki, seriously, I would love any help you have here. So, Thrive is looking at equitable outcomes for around affordable housing policies. Here you can see there's a city question and a community question. How are our policies and practices impacting equity, community building, and deliver ROI, return on investment? As we're talking about the work plan, both for our organization, for your group, for HCD, and using Luigi as an example, I have other questions, right, about that policy. I mean, definitely this equity question is very important, but for that particular policy, we may have more fine-grained questions about for example, should micro units have a different rent standard? Is there should there be a cap on how many Luigi grants are given out each year? Because we are concerned about giving away future tax revenue. Giving away is probably not the right word, but there's a limit to that at some point. But so for each pieces of these policies, city staff, as we were evaluating those, we have additional questions as well. So part of this model includes a steering committee with both city and community representation, looking at these questions. And I would assume that there's going to be maybe one or two or more of you that may be on that steering committee, or maybe somebody from your organization as well. So ultimately, there will be, a report back to City Council about what the findings of that group and some recommendations. Yeah. And Nikki, is there anything you would like to add about this?
I'll just add that looking at Thrive's original proposal as part of the ARPA process to council was based on two specific project components, namely one of which is to increase the acceptance of vouchers in our community. So as you all probably know, the landlord-tenant partnership program that Thrive has been piloting has been extremely successful, especially through the equity lens with that as well. So I think really being able to uplift that program is part of the ARPA initiative that they're doing now, as well as this other piece where these questions really center around, which is to utilize and apply an equity lens from the proposal here to see what's working and what's missing in our city's toolkit of affordable housing strategies. And then to develop shared priorities that will further move families most impacted by COVID-19 to enhanced long-term housing stability and security, specifically focusing on marginalized groups, including Black and Brown families and those families living in concentrated poverty, and then reporting out. So I think what we're seeing here is with Kate, looking now to further explore the project development. That's kind of what Sasha is presenting here now, that how to basically define the infrastructure, the committee guidance, as well as the community engagement around how to start understanding that proposal. So it seems like what we can do here today is just to acknowledge this great work that's kicking off in our community, being led by Thrive, acknowledge that that kind of alignment with what AHAC is also doing. And then hopefully we can get Kate back at a future meeting to either utilize this group for needed input, to provide updates as the process unfolds, and to continue the work. So, and Andy, it looks like you have your hand raised, so I'll let you comment.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be. I must have had too much coffee this morning. I'm kind of monopolizing the meeting even more than usual. But I don't. With Kate not in a position to present, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. But I am really curious as we're working through what Rachel shared with us this morning about the linkages between council committees and advisory committees and staff. I'd like to see reflected in sort of that flow chart where city-funded third-party research, whether it's something like this that's gathering community-based research, or studies like we've done with the Bowen Group, like when we hire consultants to feed information into our decision-making processes, where does that land in that sort of flow? Because again, there's to me, there's the handing off of tasks was really clear in what Ms. Wood shared this morning, but the filtering up of priorities and issues and concerns, and grounding those in data is a little bit fuzzier to me. And this is another one of those places where we've got a citizen advisory body, and certainly we don't have the resources to go and answer the kind of questions that Kate's proposing to answer here. So we have the city funding an organization to get that citizen input as well. So how do those two things link up so that we, so that we're creating a streamlined path for community input to go to decision makers?
Great comment, Andy. And what I'll do is this will be on the topic for discussion for that work plan item. So because I'm working on that actively on how to frame that for HCD later this month that Rachel had mentioned. So I'll include this work as how do we connect all that.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting for us because as we begin to, what we were looking at is updating the affordable housing action plan. And we want to support Kate in everything that she's doing and want to be there for her. So we want to be able to understand what she needs from us and everything. And I also understand that there's a missing middle study that's being done by the Home Builders Association.
Actually city.
Oh, okay. I thought it was Home Builders and Development Services. So will that somehow be able to be worked into these the flow charts?
It's a great question. And I think, Andy, I'm right where you are. Like, how do all these things fit together? And that's why I wanted Rachel here. And that's why I wanted Kate here today to kind of give you all the information. And maybe the oversight is not having Todd here, Todd Oklachaney, to talk about the missing middle study. I think that, yes, so council appropriated $85,000 for a missing middle study, which will be led by planning and development services together, I think. And it definitely feeds into this. And it may be, I think in our next agenda item, talking about this work plan idea for you all and how do we slot all these different things in and how do they dovetail together? We'll all figure it out somehow together.
It is very iterative. So this is great. This is great conversation. And I do think that we will continue to talk about this. So this is great. I think we'll continue to have this. So maybe even after just some reflection after that HCD meeting where we do have all those work plan items, just continuing to work on that. And this, as we said too, with that idea of developing a work plan for AHAC, then fine tuning that as well. And so I'm looking on the agenda. Is it a future agenda item to talk about a retreat as well for this group?
It's the next item. So
Okay, so maybe then that all starts to flow together. Great.
And Kate has her hand up.
Hey, y'all. So this is dangerous talking with brain fog, but I just can't resist just for a second. First of all, thanks to everyone for trying to kick this off. I'm sorry I'm not able to provide a really informative presentation at this time. I did just want to provide a little bit of context, because I agree with what's being lifted up here, which is that since we wrote this ARPA proposal in November, there's a lot of things that have changed. So this is an interesting moment to try and thread together the new efforts and find the best alignment that will make the best use of everyone's time and really advance what we all care about, which is actually helping deliver great recommendations to council about how to inform good policy wins going forward. So speaking to context, at the time that we wrote this proposal in November, this definitely wasn't just a Thrive idea. I want to acknowledge the great work of Greg Borum and the Success Equation, and also Andy and Dewana, two members of this group, were also a part of the discussion around this proposal. And so a discussion that's been happening in the community for a while around the need to really do an equity analysis of our affordable housing toolkit. And then, of course, Councilwoman Mosley really, I think, elevated this issue citywide. So I think there were a lot of things brewing together last fall that shaped this proposal, and just want to make sure that the other folks who've been really leading this charge were acknowledged in this call. And I look forward to figuring out how we're going to make sure that we're aligning all the good work that's happening and providing the most value add. So thanks so much, everyone.
Feel better, Kate.
Thank you. I'm sure you will.
Okay. So we know that we've got a lot of work to do. I think that date was July 19th that a lot of this stuff is going to HCD. And Antoinette, I know you're under the weather too, but can you, do you have any input on this situation? She may not be able to answer. So
I'm here.
Oh,
Sorry, but as of yet, I don't have quite a bit of input just yet. I was also looking forward to the June the 19th meeting. We haven't received all of the information for our meeting just yet.
okay. All right. So we will look forward to learning more and getting more information, because Rachel is saying that our next meeting on August 4th will be a big meeting. lots of stuff going to be going on in that meeting. So we hope that we'll be prepared for that. Next, we have our updates and reports from community development, and that's Nikki and Sasha to talk about their.
Oh, I thought you all have this item here about your 2008 work plan. I guess do you feel like we've covered all of that for you all?
Well, we are planning to do a work, but I think it all kind of mixes together. I mean, we're working on updating the 2008 work plan. We've sectioned off different things, but now we're learning about all these other things. So I don't know how much defined, how really defined we should get that before we learn more about what all these other parts and pieces are. I don't know.
Okay. Well, could I ask you all for your input? Do you, would it be appropriate, or would you be interested in having a retreat at some point? Maybe September, maybe we get past summer vacation time. Maybe September, when we could spend a few hours together in a room, possibly in person, maybe with masks. It wouldn't be on city property, but we have some leads on some spaces that we could actually kind of maybe map out all these things and how they fit together. And I guess that would partly be dependent on if that timeline worked for Thrive. But I think by then we might have the HCD work plan in place. We might be in a better position.
I think that's an excellent idea. And we have talked about having a work session outside to try to take what we've done and put it in place with everything that everybody else is doing and see where it all fits together. Andy, you and I have talked about that some too. So along with Barry. So I think that's a definite possibility if we can get the right dates and say mid to late September, something like that.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And
Oh, I think we need that.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, so we can move on to the update as you were trying to do, Margie. I will share my screen again. Let's see. And so, and I put this together as a slideshow. We're just trying different things. I thought about, is this just a verbal update? Is it a written update? And so I just decided I want to just show you some slides about the Luigi coming up to City Council. So I thought it was just almost easier just to throw this all into a slideshow. And so I'm going to hand it off to Nikki for this slide.
Great. So thanks. So I wanted to report out on our department restructuring and some staffing changes that we've had, because, looking back on since my new position starting effective November of last year, one of the things that I took on was really to look at how our department was organized and look to ensure that the organization of our department reflected the strategic priorities for City Council, as well as the vision and the focus areas that we want to pursue. And so really being able to structure our department to be a reflection of that is the direction that we're moving in, versus in the past, we were community development, economic development, but really what we have done is now create these 4 focus areas that you're seeing here. And I will, of course, appreciate the AHEC committee here with their influence in helping us to really define the affordable housing division and those early conversations that we had about creating the officer position. So this was our official announcement of Sasha being named as our affordable housing officer. So let me just kind of walk you through how we're looking at our structure now. So we'll start with community development. So Jonathan Jones is our community development division manager, and he manages his team. And really what they are going to focus on from here on out are our federal funded programs. So you're kind of hearing that with today's conversation, how Jonathan is going to be laser focused on the HUD framework, the communications with the federal office, and the administration of the home program, the CDBG program, the monitoring of those programs, the consolidated plan. All that work will then live within the community development division. And so their division's primary responsibility in terms of committees is what you see there in italics. So his group will be the main staff liaison to our home consortium, which is the 4-county body that serves to oversee investments in the home program. So then looking at affordable housing, and let me back up just for a second. So we do have some vacancies in that group. You all may be aware of Nancy Williams. She has now taken a position with Buncombe County. So Buncombe County is really growing their affordable housing group. And so we hate to see that Nancy jumped ship to join the county, but at the same time, I think we are well positioned to have continuous partnership with the county now more than ever. So we see it as a loss for us, a gain for Buncombe County, but we're glad that we're going to be able to keep in contact with Nancy as she really helps grow Buncombe County's affordable housing approach. We also had a staff member, Brooke Cox. She is now taking a position with Cloudburst, so a national consulting firm that works on CDBG and home. So again, we still may be in contact with her in the future, but we have a couple of vacancies that we're now looking to fill. And so with that, we're really focusing on looking at the division and making sure that those are right-sized roles and working towards that next. So that's really the community development division and how we've shaped that and how we've kind of restructured that division to meet the needs there. Creating the affordable housing group then allowed us to focus on city tools. So again, that conversation earlier is really how now we want to think about utilizing our tools and our resources that we have on addressing the myriad of issues that we face with affordable housing, right? So thinking about the city tools being the city's housing trust fund, land use incentive grant, the affordable housing bond, city-owned property. So all of those tools and programs and resources and projects that we manage are going to be focused on the work of Sasha and the affordable housing specialist, which we're very close to being able to make an announcement there, but glad to see that there'll be some exciting news in the future about this specialist position. Now, her primary responsibility will be AHAC. So again, trying to think about how does AHAC influence local policy, just looking at, of course, we may pull Jonathan in on some of these federal discussions as the work plan dictates, right? But still having Sasha be the primary staff liaison to AHAC, really focusing in on the local nature and the local control that we have over these tools and how we use this committee to provide specific input on those tools. Now, our houseless strategy division is a newly created division. So in previous times last year, the homelessness group was housed under community development. So we're really trying to give it its own focus this year, again, to reflect council's strategic priority of houseless strategy being something that council has named as one of the strategic priorities. So putting continuum of care, HMIS, permanent supportive housing, all of that now is going to be the sole focus of the houseless strategy division. Very excited that Emily Ball has accepted the position as the division manager for the houseless strategy group. This past budget cycle, we also were approved for an additional position to support that division, as well as a grant from the Dogwood Health Trust to help support the opioid settlement funding that the city will be managing. And so actually allowing another staff member to be hired into that division to support that work as well. So we'll see that division round out with the division manager. Emily will backfill her old position and then have 2 more positions to really support that work. So really hoping to start off this new fiscal year with some robust support around our houseless strategy initiatives. Then there you see too, the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee is another citizen committee that group will support, with Emily being the primary staff liaison to HIAC. So then the last piece here is our Equitable Economic Development Group. That includes the real estate division, our City of Asheville Youth Leadership Academy, Kayla. It's also our business inclusion. They're going to be doing some great work with the disparity study kicking off this year, as well as our economic development specialist who manages our incentives program. And then also we've moved strategic partnership funds from underneath the community development group to be now managed in the economic development group. With that, this group also manages the Mountain Community Capital Fund, which has now seen some additional investments through our ARPA program in investing in that funding program. It's a very exciting program to support local small business and businesses of color, women-owned businesses as well. So really excited to see the growth potential there with the Mountain Community Capital Fund. And that is our primary responsibility in terms of committees for that group. So just kind of sharing out some broad structure of, again, that it was a lot to really take on as a new director, but I'm excited about the future of our team, and I'm excited to really have this group, reflect the strategic priorities that council has. So that's all for now, but just wanted to share that update and give you all some specific insight into how we are structuring the department from here on out. Sasha, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, and I guess all I would say about the only thing I would add is that we are really excited about the affordable housing specialist that will be joining me on this team, and we're really hoping to get our arms firmly around the Housing Trust Fund and monitoring units and really kind of going to the next level of how we're tracking all these things. Yeah, and I have a lot to learn. I know a lot about a lot of things, but there's certain pieces I don't know, and I fully acknowledge that. And I don't know if I can say I'm new for a year, Rachel, but I'm going to try to be a sponge on some of the housing finance part is where I need to bone up on my knowledge.
And one last thing, since you mentioned Rachel's name, I do want to be clear too that so our department will be reporting to Rachel Wood in the reporting structure with our assistant city manager structure. So we're happy to have her also today to kind of represent the full team.
So Nikki, who is running the Equitable, the EED, that last committee? Who's in charge of that?
So effectively, for right now, it's me. We don't have headcount to really support an additional division manager right now. So that group for the time being is reporting to me. So it's, but we do hope in the future to really have a division head named for that group.
Okay.
Are there any questions about any of this before I move on to a different topic? Okay. Thanks. I'm going to, all right. So the next thing is I did want to give you all an update on the Luigi Land Use Incentive Grant going to City Council. I know that I think in the past, Paul D'Angelo would give you all updates, and what I've discussed with Margie and in an email to Barry is that I'm happy to bring these to you all. So this is coming to you after HCD and Finance. And really, you don't need to vote on it. It's not entirely the right thing to vote on it, but if you have comments for council and you want things you want them to consider or recommendations, I will take note of those and include them in my staff report when I take it to City Council. So I included all these slides, so I'll try to be fairly quick. Basically, this is a conditional zoning on Longshores Road. It's just north of Lake Julian. It was at Planning and Zoning last night and got approved. They're committing 20% of their units. So I think there's 186 units. So 37 units to be affordable at 80%. And they're also, and I will put this into your folder. So if you want to look at this after today or after this meeting, you can do that. They're also committing to housing someone from the homeless by name list, solar panels, universal design, and rental assistance. And so through that point count, they qualify for 17 years of taxes repaid back to them. It is a residential project. It's five acres, and their mix that they are proposing is 18 one-bedroom units and 19 studio units. I have sent them an email, asking if they would consider including some 2-bedroom units or 3-bedroom units. Finance Committee also made that same request last week. They are considering that and trying to answer that question to see if they could change that mix. So here's the location. It's very close to, and this is partly why those 2-bedroom units or 3-bedroom units are important. It's very close to TC Robertson and a middle school, elementary school. It's right there. It's very close to Ingalls as well, just here off to the west. Here's some elevations for you all. And here's a point summary. I've kind of already hit most of these highlights. And as I've been taking these through to City Council, I'm learning this policy. And so it's brought up a lot of questions for me in terms of when we revise this policy, should we be changing some of these things? Like, should we be requiring 2-bedroom units or changing that mix or somehow, with the points incenting different things? So it is in a non-qualified census tract. So you get 10 points there. And just for a reminder of anybody, if you don't know this, for every 5 points, it equals 1 year of your property taxes paid back. So how that works is, like, if you are the apartment owner, let's say apartment complex owner, you pay your taxes and then you submit that to the city and we pay you back. It's not an automatic thing that you don't pay your taxes. So, and it is just the city portion of your taxes. We don't have the funds to pay county taxes. So. And as part of the policy, 50% of that 20% affordable have to accept housing choice vouchers. This was just a reminder to council and the public that this is part of the city's effort to make sure that there's more units accepting vouchers. And that really helps, helps somebody looking for a unit, but then whoever comes behind them and can move into public housing, because public housing also has waiting lists. That's also a help. And so just the specifics about this project. Currently, they're paying about $13,000 every year in taxes on the vacant land. That will continue throughout the grant program. So they don't get any refund of the current tax value. They're estimating a $26 million post-completion tax value. So the city taxes on that would be about $104,000. We subtract out the $13,500 $579, and we get around $91,000 for that. Would be what we would be granting back to the property owner for 17 years. So that totals about 1.5 million over the 17 years of the land use incentive grant. Let's see. And so what that equates to is close to $42,000 subsidy per unit. So that's lower than our, overall threshold of 80,000. And then after the grant period is over, the city will start to receive those monies. And of course, this is all predicated on the current tax rate. Tax rates could change. Value of the property could go up, but the tax rate may go down. But we lock it in with the agreement at the beginning of the period. Actually, so I take back what I said. So we lock it in with an agreement at the beginning of the Luigi, and that's, we don't, if the project, doubles in value and their taxes double, we do not double our payments, because that probably would not be sustainable. And so, yeah, HCD approved this. Finance asked them to include some 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom units, but they did approve it. And so would welcome any comments or discussion that you have, any feedback. And, if you don't have any right now, but want to email me some thoughts, I'm happy to take those as well. So to open the floor to you all. Andy.
Sorry. This is really, again, less about this particular project than kind of the process work that we've been discussing off and on through this meeting. So one of the goals or functions of AHAC in our charter is to advise the city leadership and staff regarding affordable housing priorities for the investment of city-controlled funds. And so I want to make sure that we're in the right sync. Like, this is coming to us for comment after it's already been approved and after it's already been teed up for a vote by approved at HCD and finance, and before it gets teed up for council. It's surprising to me that it was actually the finance review that brought up the unit mix rather than HCD, when that's something that this committee's been adamant over the entire time that I've been on the committee to bring up with every single project. Like, you would think that was a priority that was starting to cut through from this group to HCD. So either these things need to be coming to us so that we can put that input in before they get a recommendation out of HCD, or we should be encapsulating a set of priorities like unit mix, so that HCD is using that as their scorecard in making a recommendation. So again, I don't really want to say anything particular to this project, but I think it's a good opportunity as we're going back to look at the Luigi process to hit two of our big priorities. One is the sequence of when we give input as the citizen input body, and two, the revisions that we've talked about for over a year now, about making sure that Luigi is a functional policy for small scale development as well as large scale development.
Right. And before anybody, just really quick, I think, so your canceling the June meeting kind of messed the order up here a little bit, because that would have been when I could have presented this. I don't know if I was prepared yet at that point, but yes, I think generally speaking to the order, it's actually ordered correctly. Like, AHAC's the first week of the month, HCD is the third week, and then council. So, or finance is fourth week. So I think we can fix that order pretty easily from here on out. So that's not a problem. So.
Okay. Any other comments from anybody?
Yeah, I did have a comment on the project itself. My understanding, I think, on here is that the units that are being designated affordable are inferior to the rest of the units in the complex. in terms of the size of the units. And I'm just not sure that's the direction that we want to move in for affordable housing units, where there's, a 2-tier standard for living within a complex. I don't know that was the original intent, but what they've done is they've just created units like those studios, and all of those are in their affordable category. So I personally don't think that's was the intent when we were looking to do these grants. And I'm not sure how much the unit, not just the mix of units, but the sizes of the units. And I'm not even sure that we've got guarantees on the fittings in those units will be to the same standard as the rest of the units.
Brian, when you say the fittings, are you talking about the counters, cabinets?
Yeah, the quality of the fit and finish. So countertops, cabinetry, moldings, all these kinds of things. You can make affordable units by saying, hey, let's take 20 one-bedroom apartments. Let's take 10 of our one-bedroom apartments, make them half the size of the regular one-bedroom apartments, and use inferior or lower quality materials. And you're not, you're providing a different unit. That's not the same.
So maybe they would not have granite countertops.
And I'm not exactly sure what they've done here.
Yeah, so I think that's something
that's one of the concerns that some of these developers I've seen in other communities have done to try to work the point system, is just create units that they wouldn't make market rate units anyway, because they're claiming they're market rate units, but they're smaller and might have inferior materials. So I just would like to make sure that that's been done for here from the developer standpoint.
Yeah, I think we should bring that out.
Because the Luigi grant here is buying supposedly a market rate units that's the same as any of these units. So it wouldn't matter if I was in 1A or 1B at a one-bedroom unit, but if 1A is designated affordable, that's because it was made smaller and had lower quality materials, then it's not a fungible unit.
Some good points.
And then I think we have to be careful about that with the point system in here, because what developers can eventually end up doing is creating buildings within complexes that are all of lower standard, just in order to get the points. So it can't, I guess what I want to say is we just can't be blind to the point system. We have to make sure we're making a qualitative judgment as well. Are they keeping with the spirit of what we intended to start with?
Absolutely. And I think that's where, we can, when we revise the policy, if we had language about, inferior, units cannot have inferior finishes, or buildings cannot be segregated by affordability. I think those are all great points. I think, just so you all know, there, the studio units in this complex are all the affordable ones. It's the same. Yeah. And there's a total of 86 one-bedroom units. So there are, a number of other one-bedroom units that are not affordable.
Yeah, but the question is, are they all the same one-bedroom units?
Right.
Because I can make just 18 units, and they're smaller, so they're not the same rental equivalencies as the other one-bedroom units, and that's what I'd want them to make sure of, because it's the same. I think the studio thing is a prime example of where they've created a rental unit which has no comparability market rate in the rest of the complex, because they don't intend to rent them to anybody but people who are lower means.
I saw another hand pop up somewhere.
That was me. I was just going to speak to that, adding that language, and Sasha mentioned it. Just, whatever that looks like, but we've made a lot of good points here, Brian. Thank you, for bringing this up. I think on one hand, we can see that could create like a class system within a neighborhood, and that could be really an ugly outcome. Also we want to help developers arrive at, some of, more affordable units. So, I don't know what that meet in the middle is, but definitely don't want to see an entire building, or maybe the language says something about how the units must be spread equally out through the complex, or certainly with regard to materials and fixtures, should be comparable. But anyway, thanks for bringing that up, Brian. That's great.
Very good. Emily?
Yeah, I was curious about the list of points and where that came from and the last time that that's been updated. We worked on a project recently that required the universal design overview, and it just seems like some of those points could be weighted differently. Do we have input on that list, or could we comment on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a part of the whole looking at the entire policy and asking the question, are the points weighted correctly?
Yeah.
And yeah, so they're on the website. It was last updated last summer.
Okay.
And I looked back at the 2020 policy, and I haven't had a chance to really do a deep dive. It didn't look, I don't know that there were huge changes, but I know that one change that has happened recently is there was a change to try to incent folks who had existing housing already. If you wanted to turn some of your existing rental units into affordable, that got added, and also rehabbing units. But thank you, Nikki, for putting the link in there. But that's exactly why we want to look, Emily, because the points really drive what we get, for sure. And then not only just the points, but then the next page after the points, you'll see all the requirements for the points. So for example, I noticed like solar panels is one of the items, but it doesn't actually, the policy doesn't actually say how many solar panels or how big the system size is. Like, so there's not a lot of guidance there. So when we're evaluating an application, I'm using that policy, and I can't just make stuff up. So I have to, and it needs to be in that policy for me to be able to enforce it.
Well, good. If we don't have any more comments on this, Sasha, can we move to our next item there on your list?
Thank you for those comments. I will include them in the staff report. So the affordable housing bond, just wanted to give you all a quick update on this. We gave you a presentation a couple months ago about how the money had been spent and that there was about 7.4 million left to allocate. In May, City Council allocated 1.465 of that to the Deep Review Apartments project with the Housing Authority, a tax credit project. And so staff, we're working on an allocation proposal for the remaining funds. And, I haven't discussed this with Nikki, but we could bring it to you all as well. I think basically here's the big picture is that we have to issue the bonds by next November 23. It doesn't mean you've spent all that money. So we're looking at next spring, starting that process with our bond council and getting that moving. A potential idea is putting a significant chunk into the housing trust fund, and that would give us a lot of flexibility how to spend that. And then we could spend some time with the community and you all to talk about if there are specific priorities for that money. But that's a little bit easier way than having to decide each project right away. It's an easier way for us to get that money, pull it down, and then talk about how to allocate it, have a little bit more time to talk about that. Any questions or thoughts?
I like it.
Okay. 319 Biltmore. As you all know, this is a city-owned property that we've been working on for a while. We are been working with Laurel Street Residential on an agreement to bring forward to City Council. We're currently planning to go to HCD on July 19th and City Council July 26th, but this could possibly be pushed back. We're cutting it very close here. And we don't have the final agreement that we could share with you today. But we are following our city's disposition policy for city-owned property. And just as for you all to remember, a reminder, that means our policy says we 20% of the units have to be at 60% AMI or below for at least 20 years with a mix of incomes. And I believe all of those units have to accept vouchers as well. Currently, we're looking at a total of 200 units for that site. They'd be rental units, small amount of commercial space, and surface parking. So it is different than where we were a few years ago. The change in the market and finance, labor costs, material costs is definitely impacting this project as well as other projects. So that's about where we're at. Nikki, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I just as a reminder too, that when we looked at the city's disposition policy, that was also a result of one of City Council's work sessions, and looking at how the land could serve as a subsidy to achieve that affordability. So recognizing that how the numbers function in utilizing land as a subsidy meant that this was our proposed yield for that. So just keeping that in mind is that we are also talking about the land as a subsidy to accomplish that affordability.
My comment would be that it doesn't feel like you're getting the density that you could. And I do understand the cost of construction. And I mean, I would just say that perhaps, Maple Crest is 212 units. And so I think I'm very surprised the number of units is so low. I would think that it could be, in previous presentations done by outside people, if you remember the people from Atlanta, they were looking at well over the architectural firm, 300, 400. There was a lot of opportunity there, and it seems like 200 units is really not hitting the density that could be provided. So
I understand that sentiment for sure. Any other comments before I move on?
So so it looks like that's not gonna, if this goes to HCD on the 19th, it's not gonna come back to us, or it's not gonna have a chance to come to us before, for a recommendation. I hear Margie asking a pretty important question about density. I'm also thinking that 319 was, that was land purchased with bond dollars. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So this density is really also going to drive the unit count that's attributable to bond, which, is another consideration to the unit count question. I think we've got the unit mix question that we've raised on other projects that we don't have any description of here. So, I'd like to have a little bit more detail about this project so that we could weigh in. And, I think we, as a committee, we really need a chance to discuss this trade-off on density versus, what the city's investment is going to be and whatever cost savings we're going to realize by doing a less dense project, and be able to have some input on that.
I think if you move to 300 units, but had to have less than 20% of them be affordable, you might end up with more units in total that are meeting the demand for 60% AMI residents. So relaxing some of the constraints might actually make the project deliver more housing units for the target population, even though it's increased the total. We have a lower percentage.
Right.
I think one of the drivers here is parking, frankly, because this is surface parked, and I think because I think a lot of what we were looking at initially were higher unit counts, but structured parking.
Yeah.
And so the structured parking, I think it just throws the costs totally, the math changes completely. So,
Well, and
You know,
that's a perfect example of where this committee really has the opportunity to give some guidance, right? I mean, I think we make a lot of assumptions when we're thinking about affordable housing that parking is something that we can make a concession on. And the reality is that, you know, low wage workers in our community are largely not getting around on transit. They're driving, and often multiple vehicles for multiple workers in a single unit in order for them to have the income to afford the cost of housing, even affordable housing. So, I mean, that site needs something other than surface parking with just the Maple Crest parking demands.
Right. And you can see Maple Crest, the people are parked everywhere up and down the streets and I mean, across the street and all kinds of places because there's so many cars. But it is expensive. I mean, podium parking is not cheap. It's, you know, anywhere from $25,000 to $30,000 a space. But on the other side of that, you can get a lot more units, which is the goal.
Chris, were you going to say something?
no, I was just going to add. I don't know all the factors associated with the current density. I have been working with Laurel Street on this a little bit, but just knowing the property and structured parking was what I was going to bring up. Was one of the factors that, along with, while it's a nice large piece of property, the way the road system's laid out and tying to Biltmore Avenue at the intersection, it basically bisects that property, and so it doesn't fit nicely for parking structures either, with either side. So it's got some, just like all of our sites in Western North Carolina, it's got site challenges, but at the same time, depending on where we want to put priorities on funding and how parking or structured parking might be incorporated, it is a parking thing that's one of the significant factors driving what you can get out there.
Okay. Well, if we, you know, if this ends up getting pushed back, we can come back to this next month. I'm gonna, since we're getting low on time, I'm gonna keep going. We did publish the new 2022 data last week, or July 1. I haven't done a big deep dive on this, but I did look and just did a comparison from 21. And these incomes and rents are generally about a 7% increase over the 2021 numbers. So, so that is on our website. And then just, if there are any other questions or comments, and then I'm done, and know we have a few other items. So,
right. Okay, so I'm going to ask the AHEC divided itself up into two different committees, work groups to talk about how to further small developers doing smaller number of units, and what are some of the things we could do to help them. And we divided up into a build task force and a connect task force. Andy headed up the connect task force, and myself and Barry and Scott were on the build task force. Scott, can you give us a little bit of an update on where we are on that?
Sure. So we started meeting just last summer in July, and we've met with kind of a cross spectrum of stakeholders. We are, I think, in a nutshell, trying to focus on a lot of the more technical aspects of what can and cannot be built, and when and where it can be built. A couple of quick examples, just looking at accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. Last year, there was a state Senate bill proposed, Senate Bill 349, increase housing opportunities. And it basically was trying to look at how to align building code with numbers of units. Essentially, if you're building 3 or more units, that's kicking you into commercial code versus residential code, and the proposal was to allow up to 4 units under residential code. Another quick insight that we had meeting with representatives from the Metropolitan Sewerage District of Buncombe County is that they would actually need a charter revision to allow MSD-initiated sewer expansion. Currently, they're only able to expand based on a given development request. Finally, just a quick kind of nuts and bolts third example of factors that we met on was with the city fire marshal. Currently, fire access roads are prohibited from being over 15% grade. Obviously, being here in Asheville and Western North Carolina, that's a challenge, and a lot of existing streets are steeper than that. So in a nutshell, we're trying to discern what are local zoning and development rules that could possibly be changed in tandem where they're applicable with state code rules, either fire or building code. So prepared a document of our notes to date, and that's really in sort of a draft form. I shared that with the build subgroup. I'd be glad to share that with the larger committee as well. But I think lastly, some of these findings I think could really dovetail with the planning department's initial start into the missing middle housing study. I think a lot of the site-driven constraints are a factor in that as well. And Chris, I don't know if you wanted to speak any more to what we've done, but that's kind of my quick summary of work to date.
Good summary, Scott.
Thanks.
So Andy, you're going to do connect.
Yeah, I'll keep this short. We met on the 17th, really digging into the AHAC's the 2008 Comprehensive Housing Plan that AHAC is operating under. Particularly a couple of the recommendations that seem to focus around how people connected with existing housing units and resources. We spent a fair amount of time looking at, what was recommended then and what's happened in the intervening 14 years. And we have a couple of data requests that would help shed some light on those things. We're also looking at how through the Connect team, we can help link up some of the work that's happening with Success Occasion Housing Team, the Thrive Project, some work that's going on with the Land of Sky Regional Council, or not Regional Council, Land of Sky Realtors Association. We'll be meeting with them as our next meeting, kind of linking together some of these different things that we've talked about this morning. And I will. We did have a discussion about the open seat on AHAC, and know that this seat had been identified as for someone representing the housing authority, and we had a question about whether that needed to be housing authority staff member, or could we reach out through the housing authority's residence council to fill that seat as well. Again, trying to broaden the perspective of voices that are represented on this committee.
Yes, I was going to say that brings us to the fact that we've got any number of open seats coming up, and got the information from Sasha that Boards and Commission is releasing today the open seats, and that applications are due August 1st. So we have myself, Andy, Paul and Joe and Babs Phillip. Our terms are up on September 1. Most of us, except for Joe, can reapply for our second term, but it's open to the public to get your applications in. So that is on Boards and Commissions. So we encourage all those out in the public that are listening to this today to think about that, being on this committee. Just quickly wanted to say that we have a partner event with LOTSAR, with Matt Allen, on a housing fair and the 2022 Housing Street release, which is a booklet that talks about all the different housing, affordable housing locations and apartments in the city. That event is going to happen on September 10th, which is a Saturday. And I don't have the address yet exactly of where that's going to be held, but by our next meeting, we will have that information. So that's a joint venture with them that on the housing fair. There'll be several of us on a committee that Matt Allen is putting together. And then we have one other thing on infill development, homeownership banker forum. Is Sasha, if you want to quickly.
Oh, I was not ready for that.
That's okay. That's
I can send out an email. I can get information and send an email to everybody about that.
Okay, sounds good. Laura, or do we have anybody on? Because we're last night we did not have any comments or anybody on call. But can you look for us again to see if there's anybody online for comment, public comment?
And Emily, I think she left the. Let me go look. I'll go look real quick. And while I do that, Emily asked a question about the timing of the build and connect task forces.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that.
And then,
okay. We meet, the build task force meets once a month and typically from 1 to 3 on like the second Tuesday of the month. And Connect, I'm not sure when you meet.
Hang on. Give me a second. We typically meet Friday at noon once a month, usually either the second or third Friday of the month.
Okay. So Emily, we can get you more specifics. We can email that to you so you'll know exactly where and stuff like that.
Hey, Margie, this is Paul. I'm on that committee at the Land of the Sky Board of Realtors.
Oh, okay.
The address is 25 Restaurant Court. That's the new Lotzar building. And that's that September 10th date. The Connect committee is also meeting with that committee to help with the planning of that event.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And anybody that doesn't know, 25 Restaurant Court's right off of Tunnel Road. So, okay, if there are no other,
Margie, there is actually somebody in the queue.
Okay.
Let me, now it looked like their hand, yes, I'm going to tap, and if you're listening to the speaker, you should be able to go ahead. Let's see. So just take a second.
Hello, this is Greg Borum with Children First Communities and Schools in Buncombe County. Thanks for a chance to provide public comment. I did want to say that we've been talking a lot over the years, as all of you have heard me say before, about making sure that the units that are getting built are those that can house families with children. And I appreciate that issue being raised in today's conversation. And I would say that really the next step is not just to be part of the conversation, but to really figure out how we can put that into policy practice. And I think that there are a couple examples raised at the meeting today, both in terms of as this committee gets a chance to maybe review the Luigi policy, as well as even looking at any remaining bond dollars that are being spent. Again, how can we not just look at number of units that are affordable, but what types are they? How many bedrooms? Is this helping to promote stable and affordable housing for families with children? Thanks for all your work at both staff and committee level.
Thank you. No other callers?
No.
Okay, so I will now adjourn the meeting unless there are any objections. So adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Great job, Margie.
Thanks,
Margie. Great job. Great job. Thanks, Andy. Thanks all.